Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1.2 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In today's episode 336, brought to you by Australian Hiker, we talk with Sarah Groves about hiking some of Iceland's hidden trails over a 12-day period. We hope you enjoy. If you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Iceland is a destination that you don't tend to hear too much when it comes to hiking. So when Aussie hiker Sarah Groves contacted me late last year, I was keen to find out more. Over a 12-day period, Sarah and her group hiked 160 kilometres on some of Iceland's hidden trails. In this podcast episode, we talk with Sarah about her Icelandic adventure. Sarah, thanks for making the time to chat with us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Tim, and hopefully this will inspire others to explore an adventure in Iceland.
Okay, now before we start talking about the hiking itself, to provide a bit of context, give us a bit of background on your hiking experience, what the sort of hikes you like and probably the main hikes that you've done.
Okay, I guess generally in the last couple of years I've retired, so I've had a lot more time. Prior to that, I probably only started hiking seriously around 5 years ago. The children finally finished school, left home, so we had a lot more time. But when they were around, we used to do a lot of short family hikes, camping, walking around the Namadgi, also Kosciuszko. I guess recently the main hikes that I've done have been a bit more serious pack hiking. The Inca Trail was one of them. Hadrian's Wall was one of the most recent ones. Without my husband, I did Annapurna Base Camp and the Great Ocean Road Walk. We did together the last 120 kilometres of the Camino Francis. In Australia, we've done a lot of training towards the Overland Track, so we completed it a couple of years ago, the Walls of Jerusalem. We did those two back-to-back, which was fantastic. 3 Capes, Murramarang Coastal Walk. So quite a lot in the last 5 years, but nothing really prior to that in terms of pack hiking or end-to-end hiking.
I think it's one of those sort of things. It's almost a lifestyle sort of thing. You when you're young, you often you have time, but you don't often have the money. Then you sort of have family, and then it's often until you retire that you actually get the time back again, and you can start doing quite a lot of hiking and getting back into the swing of things again.
That's right. The type of hiking that I probably like to do the most is non-organised, just with the two of us, planning and then doing that walk ourselves. Obviously, you can't always do that. So some of the overseas ones, we've had to use organised groups and companies, and they've all worked out fantastic as well. So for us, the less people, the better. But sometimes that's just not possible.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And sometimes it's a bit easier. As much as I love organising and planning, sometimes when you're dealing with overseas trips, it's often easier to get the more logistical stuff out of the way and then just do the walking yourself. So it's good to see.
Those overseas ones, we always do all the planning around flights and travel ourselves, but just use a company to book the actual trek.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Now, onto the Iceland Hidden Trails trip. How did you end up choosing Iceland? And I must admit, it's a hiking area I've been aware of, but I've never come across anyone that's actually done some of the trips before. So why Iceland?
Yeah, look, it was an interesting one. We've got a number of big ticket trips on our wish list for the next few years. Iceland wasn't one of those, but I kept seeing them come up on Instagram, and then people that we knew talked about the Lugavega Trail and a company called 57 Hours. So we started to look into them and saw a couple of options with 57 Hours that we might like, that's not actually the Lugavega Trail, which is the most common one that everybody does. We wanted to get off the beaten track and try and do something different. So 57 Hours actually have an affiliation with the company that we booked through, Amarok Adventures. So we saw their trip for 12 days of hidden trails and thought that it looked really good because you don't see a great deal of people while the walk is happening. So we thought maybe that was the one for us. So we actually contacted Amarok Adventures, and the experience from day one was fantastic. They're a male-female partnership. They are partners, but they run the company together. Do 8 hikes a year now through the hidden trails through the summer season every year. And they trek separately, so they never walk together. They always leave 3 days apart, which is quite a good concept because if anything goes wrong with either trip, the other person is there to assist if necessary. So I guess that's how we found Iceland and thought that's the one for us.
Okay, no, that's good. And what I'll do is I'll put the company name on the show notes for this podcast. So if people are interested in find out more about it and who you did it with, the details will be there. Now, give us a bit of an overview to this trip as far as logistics, so distances, and in fact, was this multiple trails or a single trail? And just a bit more logistical information.
Okay. It's 160 kilometres in total, the hidden trails. It is one main trail, but it's not advertised anywhere, and there are no maps other than what Amarok Adventures have produced themselves of that area. It does start at the trailhead for the Lugavega Trail at a hut, a camping ground, and a beer shack, I would say, called Land Manalauga. So that is where the Lugavega Trail starts as well. And it ends at Thorsmork, where that Lugavega Trail ends, but it goes off track after 2 days and does a huge loop on hidden trails in the Icelandic highlands. So once you've done those first 2 days where there's quite a few people, you lose track of people altogether, and a lot of the time it is just the group that you're walking with, which makes it pretty special.
So by the sound of it, and excuse me for the pronunciation, the Lugavega Trail is probably the main one that people go to Iceland to do, is it?
That's correct. It's about 55 kilometres, but we thought if we're going all the way to Iceland, we don't just want to walk 55 kilometres. So we chose a larger trail once we'd found hidden trails that does 160 kilometres or thereabouts. It's a 12-day trip, but you're only walking for 10 of those days. You average around 16 kilometres a day. Some are a lot more, possibly up to around the 28, and some are a lot less. It depends on the weather in terms of the river heights and whether you have to take different tracks, cross different rivers, not cross a river and turn back because you've had problems. Just all depends on what happens on the day, really.
Okay, no, that's good. And I must admit, as I said, I've heard about Iceland. I've heard there is hiking there, but just wasn't aware of any details. So that's, it's another thing I can add to my bucket list.
It'd be well worth adding it to the list.
Okay. Was it all trail, or was it trail and walking across fields? What sort of mix was it?
Look, the first day when you meet, it's not until around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you meet at the base camp in Reykjavik itself, and then they give you a briefing and safety, and you meet all the other people on the group. And then they take you around 160 kilometres in a 4x4 modified vehicle to a town in the south of Iceland where you actually stay in a hostel. You're in shared rooms, and it's probably the most luxurious accommodation that you'll stay on this trip. By no means is it luxurious at all. Then on the second day, they take you out by vehicle again to the trailhead, and you spend 2 nights in the one accommodation at the trailhead, and that's where you start doing some day walks. And really, I guess that's for them to assess what sort of level you're at and how the group is going to cement and work together, walk together, strengths, weaknesses. It works as a really good start to the trip with everybody in the one place. And you're not actually carrying your pack at that stage. So the trails from there, some of them might be through rocky creek beds. They might be 400 to 800 metre elevation gains on old volcanic soil that moves quite a bit underfoot. It might be over old lava fields that are a bit like old, like coral beds. If you fell on them, you would really damage yourself. They're very hard, but it's quite hard to traverse your way through it. So very different terrains. And then as you get further in, there's switchbacks down hills that are very steep. There's drop-offs. There's nice winding trails that are covered in moss on either side. River crossings. It's quite different throughout the whole trek.
Okay. Now, I mean, I'm not so familiar with Iceland. I know where it sits on the map, but that's probably about the extent of it. Were there any steep sections on your hike, or was it similar gradients throughout your trip?
Basically, the trailhead and the end of the trail both sit at around 600 metres elevation. The highest elevation gain you actually do in a day is 800 metres. There is gain and loss every day, but it's not a great amount.
Yeah, I must admit, I have no concept of whether they've got mountains there at all, and it sounds like they do, but then it doesn't. I don't know what the tallest mountain in Iceland is, but it doesn't sound like you're going over them if that's the case.
No, you're going up and down certain areas. The tallest, I think, is only around 1,800 metres. Maybe it's not huge.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough, and it's as I said, sometimes you think, I know it does get snowy and icy during wintertime, but you think, okay, well, there's going to be big mountains, but it's not a particularly big country compared to, say, Greenland as an example. Now, what time of the year did you do this trip? You mentioned they tend to be summertime hikes, but what time did you end up doing it? And was it you just picked a convenient time, or you picked the time where you thought it was going to be the best weather?
I don't think there's any best weather in Iceland. We booked the last trip of the summer season, which left sort of mid-August and finished towards the end of August. We picked that trip because we were actually going away for 2 months. So it was the start of our trip, and it fit in with another couple of activities that we were doing at the end of it. Rather than just going to Iceland for 12 days, we would have only seen the highlands, so we decided we would do a G Adventures tour for 6 days that circumnavigated Iceland to make sure we saw as much as we could see. And then we were going down into Scotland and Northern England. So it just fitted because we were meeting some people in Northern England.
As you say, rather than flying there doing a single hike, you might as well get the best value for money out of the air flights and spend as much time there, because you may or may not ever go back again.
Would love to, but I don't think we will.
Now, when I picture Iceland, I think of open grasslands rather than forests. What was the vegetation like on this trail? Was it a lot of grassland, or do they have good forests there as well?
The main vegetation on the trail itself was moss, which there's over about 600 varieties of moss. They thrive through the lava fields. It's just the prime environment for them to grow in. There were low bush blueberry bushes, just ground cover. So we stopped and ate a lot of blueberries along the trail, much smaller than what we have here, but they were very good. And then as you get towards the end near Thorsmork, there's some birch forests. But other than like the last day or heading into the last day, you don't see any trees at all. It is the moss and hundreds of varieties of the moss.
I must admit, I if I have to pick a type of vegetation, moss and lichen are probably my two favourite things. So I could very easily spend days and days just taking photos of all that sort of stuff. So definitely another reason to go.
It's just stunning, and the fluorescent green that you see throughout the trail is just amazing.
Now, was there any animal life in this trail, or is it more farm animals?
Not a lot of anything really. We spotted some small birds. We're not twitchers, so I really wouldn't know what they were. Sheep, and generally it was just 3 sheep that you would see on a mountainside somewhere, and it seemed to be always groups of 3. I have no idea why. But they are let up into the mountains during summer, and then the shepherds and farmers come and bring them back down to the lower lands for winter and put them away. There are a lot of horses and Arctic foxes, but not on the trail itself. Like, we didn't see any Arctic foxes. We saw hundreds of horses, but more in the lowlands, not up in the highlands where we hiked.
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting actually. I think countries like Australia, yes, you see farm animals, particularly depending if you're hiking in rural areas, but you expect to see a lot of native wildlife and a lot of birds, whereas Europe and that sort of area, it tends to be, again, mainly farm animals, but particularly if you start going up high or you're in climates that are a bit extreme, you are fairly limited. So it's more about the landscape and the vegetation rather than the actual animal life itself. Now, from a logistics perspective, you mentioned this was an organised trip. So talk to us about the company that you went through and what was included.
So the company, I think I mentioned before, is Amarok Adventures, and they're just a 2-person company. And they've recently opened a base camp in Reykjavik itself. So it's your responsibility to either meet them at the bus station or meet them at base camp on the first day. And they are very good at communicating times with you. And prior to leaving, probably maybe a couple of months before we left, they actually did a Zoom conference with everybody that was going on the trips for that season. So there were people from all over the world. They cut off the audio so you couldn't talk to them, but you could type in questions and they would answer them throughout that chat. So it was really good to get any questions answered, information that you needed about anything extra you needed to take, the weather. Fantastic for them to do that. Very different times throughout the world that people had to log on, but it was very good. The first day with them, you cover your own dinner, and then from then on, everything is included: breakfast, lunch and dinner, all your transport until lunchtime on the last day when you are driving back to Reykjavik. So you don't have to worry about anything in terms of packing food unless you want any snacks or extras that you want to take with you.
If you don't mind me asking, what was the trip cost and what are the airfares like to get from Australia to Iceland?
I think the airfares are always horrendous. It's around 8,000 Australian dollars each to do the hike. Iceland's a very expensive country. It's around $120 each to get a bus transfer from the airport into the city. Airfares, look, they're generally around the 2-3 normally from Australia to Heathrow to London. And then we had separate flights from London into Reykjavik. We stayed overnight in London just because we were concerned about whether flights would be delayed and whether we'd meet connections. So it was just easier to get a flight the next morning. Flights from London to Reykjavik were maybe around the 400 to 500 each.
Yeah.
And then on the way back, we flew from Reykjavik to Edinburgh, and they were probably around the same. It takes around 3 hours from London into Iceland.
Oh, that's not too bad. It's not as if you're spending, apart from the long trip from Australia to London, 3 hours is quite reasonable. Did you? And that prompts a question. Did you take a day or two to rest before you started the trip, or did you turn up the day before the trip?
No, we definitely took some days. We booked an Airbnb for 3 days because we wanted to do some snorkeling through the tectonic plates before we started. So, plus, because a couple of cappuccinos cost around $30,
Oh,
it the Airbnb meant that we could get our own breakfast, lunch and dinner, and we didn't have to look at those additional costs while travelling. Yes, you try a few things here and there, but if you had to eat out every night, it would cost a fortune.
yeah. No, I suppose that's the thing. I mean, I'm sure there's some they probably import a lot more stuff than say we would because it's a bit more
Transport as well.
remote. You're paying for the transport as well. Yeah, so it's always one of those things. It's not people. We're actually quite lucky, and I don't think people quite realise that we're actually relatively cheap in Australia, and you find that out when you do go overseas, particularly to Europe.
We all complain while we're here, but when you travel, you do soon learn.
From your perspective, how easy was it? I mean, you talked about getting the flights. It sounds like it was a relatively easy process, really, from a flight from I'm guessing Sydney to London and then London to Reykjavik. So that's actually quite a not so difficult process to get there. Was it, or was it? Was there a bit of complexity?
Look, we fortunately or unfortunately, we never go and do one thing. So when we add all the other things to it, there's always a lot of logistics. I guess if you went through a travel agent, it would make things easier, but we like to do it ourselves. But certainly if you flew direct from here to London and then into Iceland, it is relatively simple. It's just the length of time it takes.
Yeah, no, it's. I must admit, I've done that flight previously from Australia to London, and and unfortunately, I'm not the sort of person that can sleep on a plane, so I get to watch lots of movies.
You do.
Now, was this a carry everything sort of trip? So once you'd gotten past those initial day or two where you weren't carrying a pack, what were you actually carrying in your pack typically throughout the hiking itself?
It is carry everything trek. So we had a lot of extras with us as well. We did only take our hiking packs, large hiking packs, and then a small pack to take on the plane. But the hiking packs were very full, which we took a lot of things out and put them into storage in Reykjavik while we were there. So in the large hiking pack itself, they recommend around 9 to 10 kilos. I did find that a little bit difficult, and I've recently moved to a Mystery Ranch pack, which weighs 2.4 kilos itself.
Yep.
So it's just a lot more comfortable. But generally what you needed were your clothes throughout the 10 days, 12 days, plenty of rain gear and good rain gear, water bottles. I took some sterilisation tablets. I used them sometimes, but not all the time. I took probably 10 days of protein powder, and you've got things like your electronics, your headlight and toiletries and a sleeping bag. Other than that, you don't need anything else.
Now with sleeping bag, did you bring your own sleeping bag, and what sort of temperature rating did you bring on your bag?
I did take my own bag. It was sometimes too hot. It was never not enough. It's Cedar Summit Flame 4, I think, minus 10 comfort.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a pretty warm bag. So, it's probably, in some respects, it's probably better to be, if you get cold, then you're not enjoying yourself. So as long as you're not grossly overheating every night of the trip, but yeah, it's always hard to tell sometimes. And I'm guessing the company will actually make recommendations on what to bring, but it sounds like it is summertime. And actually, speaking of summertime, what were the temperatures between the maximums and minimums?
So around 10 to 15 during the day.
Yep.
And probably 2 to 10 overnight. around that. Not super cold, but when you are walking in rain all day, sometimes it feels colder.
That's fair enough. And 10 to 15 sounds cold, and if you're a Queenslander, you're probably going to know about it. But that for me is ideal sort of hiking temperature. Once I start getting over 15, 16 degrees, I've got to be very careful that I don't sort of overheat. So, yeah, the cooler temperatures are much. Yeah, you can always get warm. It's very hard to get cool.
And those bags, they only zip like 3/4 of the way down, but you can leave them open and just pull them over if you need them later in the night.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So apart from the gear you've just gone through and mentioned, was there any group gear that you were carrying or that was provided for you or carried for you?
No group gear at all. No one, the leader didn't carry any group gear either. They have boxes that they transport in prior to the commencement of the hike, and they leave them at each of the huts. So they're putting them in like cellars at the huts. There's no real refrigeration, but it seems to be cold enough to keep the food fine throughout the hike.
Yeah, I suppose people that lived there for however many hundreds of years would have worked out, and I'm sure the root cellars and things like that probably did their job quite well. Now, you mentioned the huts. Was it all hut accommodation, or were you camping at any stage?
Not camping in tents at any stage. At the Lugavega Trail, the shorter one, it's generally huts or tents. The trailhead and the end of the trek has a very large tent campground, but we stayed in mountain huts throughout the trek. Some were quite big and housed up to 60 people in like separate dormitory type rooms. Sometimes our group alone were in a room. Other times you were sharing with others that were on the trek. Generally, they were 2 stories, and it was pretty much basically mattresses that are around 15 to 20 centimetres thick, side by side.
Yep.
So you're hoping that they're not super full, because to even roll over would be pretty difficult. If you're next to a snorer, it would be horrific.
We've been to Switzerland a couple of times, and that what you've just described is the Swiss Alps as far as the accommodation, and I'm guessing through a lot of those colder countries up there, they're all working on similar sorts of things. I was going to say, how big was your group?
The groups are up to 12, but we had 3 people cancel, so we had a group of 9 and the guide. So it was a nice small group. There was a mix of Americans, Canadians, and my husband and myself. I mean, it's not that far for Canadians or Americans to fly across there, so you tend to get more of them on this type of trip. Some of the huts, it was just our group, so it was a much smaller hut. It probably only had 15 mattresses in it, but with the small group, it was fantastic. And inside those huts there are sometimes running water. Only I think one had hot running water, stove and the cooking equipment. All your utensils and glasses and coffee mugs and plates, they're all provided in all the huts.
Yep.
So you just clean those up and put them back on the shelves when you're finished.
What did your typical day on this hike look like? So take us through from the start of the day to the end of the day.
So we probably got up around the 7:30 mark. Breakfast was probably put out around the 8 o'clock, and it was the guide putting all the breakfast items out, and then you would help yourself to breakfast, and all the items for lunch would also be out there, so you'd make yourself lunch, put it in the lunchbox that was provided, and we'd probably set off around 9 o'clock. There was never any real rush in the morning, and we, as a group, were not allowed to touch the boxes and take any of the items out of the box. I did think it quite strange at the beginning, but when you see people's eating habits and how much they eat, the guide has to put things out and ration things so that she knows she's got enough for everybody and for every meal. And there was always plenty of food. From there, we'd set off hiking. We'd have our lunch and snacks with us. Never any real set time for lunch or snacks. We sort of taking a thermos to start with, and I'm so glad we didn't, because with the weather, we probably only stopped for maybe 20, 30 minutes for lunch if we were lucky, because sometimes you were hiding behind a rock trying to keep your sandwich dry. And the snacks, sometimes you'd eat them as you were walking. You generally really wouldn't stop for snacks. And then you would walk along again in the afternoon, and depending on the length of the day, you might be at the hut at 3 or you might be at the hut at 7. It just depends on what happens throughout the day. You would then rest while the poor guide's getting all the food ready, and she was doing dinner for all of us. Generally, we would assist just by setting the table and getting that side of things ready. We'd all sit as a group and have dinner. The cleanup was a responsibility of us as a group, so luckily the guide could then get a bit of a rest and we would do all the cleanup. You could then play cards, read, or sleep. Huts generally had lights. If you wanted to use the bathroom, it was probably about a 20, 30 metre walk away from the hut, so you'd need your head torch. Sometimes there was a shower, sometimes there wasn't, so you'd just need to do your ablutions and clean yourself up the best you could. If you were game, you would go for a dip in the creek, but that certainly wasn't me.
No. Now, I was going to say, what was the daylight like? Now, you said you were obviously doing a trip towards the end of the season, but were they long days or were they short days? As far as sunlight was concerned.
As far as light, yeah, generally around the 7 you would get some light, and it would stay light till maybe 8 o'clock. So the days were quite long. Actually, even later, sometimes it was 10 o'clock that it stayed relatively light until.
Yeah, I was going to say it's if you had have done the trip a bit earlier in the middle of the season, it probably would have been much longer again. So
yeah, very much lighter. If you were lucky, at the first couple of nights there were natural thermal pools. So at the end of the day hikes, you'd go and relax your muscles in the thermal pools, which were fantastic. But we only got those on the first couple of days. There's another one about halfway through the hike, but that day we had consistent rain from daylight till dark.
Yeah. Now, what was the interaction with the other hikers and or the locals like?
In terms of on the trail itself, some of the bigger huts had a lot of people at them, so you'd talk to people around the meal hours, or if you were sitting in the hot springs. One of them had like 3 old American buses that were set up in a U shape. One was a bar, one was a little shop, and one was a museum. So they had a fire in the middle that you could sit over there and buy yourself a beer and chat to whoever you wanted to. Once we got past that first couple of days, which is the start of the Lugavega Trail, which is a large hut, we then went to probably 3 huts where it was just us. So we honestly didn't pass or see anybody else on those days. Then towards the middle and the end again, some of the huts were getting a little bit bigger. So you would see some random people walking the trail, but we never saw any other large groups walking. So it was nice.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, by the sound of it, if you want lots of people around and want people interaction, it sounds like the Lugavega Trail is going to be one to go for. But if you want a bit more solitude, the trip you did sounded like quite a good option.
Very good option.
Now, what were the highlights for you?
I think the general landscape itself was something that we had never seen before. So the stunning moss everywhere, the water crossings were exciting but scary. The group was a highlight because they were a great group to walk with and we all got on really well. 7 out of the 9 were sort of at the same speed. There was a couple of times that a couple of them would be put up the front just so that the guide could keep pace, so she wasn't going too fast, so we could all stick together. Generally, the terrain and the landscape, being able to eat wild berries, know people, was just a fantastic experience.
Now, I was going to say, just a couple of questions I meant to ask you is, what sort of footwear were you wearing? Was it boots or was it trail runners?
It was boots, and I always forget they're a La Sportiva boot.
Yep.
They're very comfortable. And I also took a pair of like water shoes, but they're a bit like a Croc, but they're a Merrell version of the Croc. In hindsight, something that was more closed would be better, because as you're walking through water crossings, there's a lot of small stones and volcanic sand and rock. So even to wear something like you'd wear spearfishing without flippers, something like that might be better, but we got there.
No, that's fair enough. And the other thing I forgot to ask you as well is, we were talking about food. What was a typical dinner for you? I mean, I've got an idea what Icelandic food is like.
Okay, so dinners, they were pretty much all vegetarian. The start, we had fresh fish on the barbecue, salmon, because it was being brought in fresh probably the day before or the day of. Then the remaining days through the middle of the hike were things like vegetarian pastas, risottos, soups. We had some amazing tinned confit duck, which were duck legs in a large tin that went through risotto. They were sensational. The last day, a lot of the pastas and risottos had a lot of things like sun-dried tomatoes, dehydrated mushrooms, things that are easy for them to take in. And the last night they did grilled lamb chops and potatoes and salad. And we actually had tiramisu on the last night at camp, but it was pretty good. And red wine.
Okay, so nothing that people from Australia wouldn't recognise and get upset about?
No, not at all. And you can send through your dietary requirements. I have a slight allergy to smoked salmon, so there was quite a bit of smoked salmon for sandwiches and things. But there were plenty of other options that you could use instead of that.
I must admit, I love salmon. I love salmon, raw salmon. Smoke it just kills it for me. And I'll eat it if I have to, but it wouldn't be my first choice.
Yeah, I won't eat it if I have to.
Okay, now we talked about the positives and the highlights of the trip. Were there any negatives from your perspective at all?
No real negatives.
No insect problems at all?
No insect problems at all. Look, as I said, no real negatives. A couple of things where the weather was the issue, but no one can change that. You've just got to embrace it and go with it. One of the days where we were supposed to do 6 kilometres as a bit of a rest day, there were huge amounts of rain coming down the rivers, and we had crossed one river in a chain link of all of us and got to the next river, and it was way too high and way too dangerous, so we had to turn around and recross the chain link river. And we ended up probably walking about 25 kilometres that day in the rain. So it's not a negative, but you just have to be prepared for things to change as the weather changes or situation changes. But in terms of a definite negative, none at all.
Okay, that's good. Overall, how did you find Iceland as a tourist destination?
It's a very friendly destination, fantastic to travel in. You obviously need to do your research first and find out how expensive it actually is, and to see what you want to do while you're there. A lot of people go and hire vehicles with rooftop tents. For us, it was easier to do an organised tour. We looked at a couple of options for after the trek, but found the organised tour would be much easier. There's a lot of different roads that the cars you hire are not covered for. So if anything happens while you're looking down these roads when you're not supposed to be. There's large expense involved. A fantastic place to travel to. It's quite different in terms of the landscape to what we've ever seen before, so it was quite exciting. And some other things that we did while we were there as well was we did a glacier hike after the main trek, so we spent half a day walking up on the glaciers, which was fantastic. And we also did the 2-degree tectonic plate snorkeling out of Reykjavik as well, which was a great experience. So lots to do.
So after doing this walk, who would you say it's suitable for?
Look, I like to say it's suitable for the majority of people if you've done the work prior. It's advertised as a challenging trek, generally tailored to individuals that have done some training and are in good physical shape. It also has a warning for heights, which I was quite concerned about before we left. I don't particularly like heights. There were some days where you were walking along quite narrow trails on quite a gradient that if a gust of wind or you slipped one way, you'd definitely end up at the bottom. So for me, that was a little bit challenging. So if you put in the training where we try and strength train 4 days a week and do some hiking training through Namadgi and Kosciuszko, other than the height, the trek itself wasn't overly strenuous. We didn't feel, but we were pretty fit.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So you don't have to be a super fit hiker, but you've got to have a good level of fitness and by the sound of it, not be too fussed about some higher exposure.
I think anyone with a decent level of fitness and not a great fear of heights would have a fantastic time.
And that prompts me. You mentioned you had some Canadians and some US people. What was the average age of the group? Were you all a similar age, or was there quite a big age range?
No, quite similar. Probably between the 50 and 65 would have been everybody.
I was going to say with the price of the trip, that's probably going to get rid of the backpacker crowd. It's probably going to be a population that has A, the time, and B, a bit more income that they can actually spend on a trip rather than looking for the $2 a night accommodation.
You definitely won't find it.
No. One final question: what's your next great hiking adventure?
Funny you should ask. We generally have a couple organised, but the next one is at the beginning of April to Everest Base Camp.
Yep.
With an Australian-based mountaineering company. So by going with the mountaineering company, we actually get to walk past the rock that says Base Camp, another 40 metres walk in, and spend 2 nights Everest Base Camp. And we'll have 3 actual mountaineers that are going to hopefully summit Everest with us, and another 8 that are going to summit Lobuche. So quite exciting.
Okay. Sarah, thanks for making the time to talk with us about your adventure on Iceland's hidden trails.
Thanks, Tim.
So that was our interview with Sarah on her Iceland hidden trails trip, which she did towards the end of 2025. For me, Iceland's been one of those destinations that I have been aware that they do have hiking trails, and I do hear of people from time to time going there. But Sarah was the first person I'd had a chance to talk to who had actually been there and was able to give us an interview on and to help describe what it is. The trail, which she does mention a few times through the podcast, is and again, forgive the pronunciation here, the Ludovica Trail. And if you go online and at the link in our show notes to the travel organisations that run trips there, it's probably not an unrealistic sort of price. Whereas the Iceland hidden trails trips, when you add 2 adults into that and airfares and everything else, you're starting to get up there in price. Now, unsurprisingly, the average age of the people on Sarah's trips were in their mid-50s through to mid-60s.
Yeah, it says a lot, doesn't it?
And again, it comes down to has the time and has the money to be able to do one of these sort of trips. It's not a trip aimed at backpackers. It is a trip that's aimed at someone who has the resources to be able to go through and do it.
Yeah, and I think it's also probably one of those trips that you don't have first on your list. Certainly I hadn't thought about hiking in Iceland until I heard the interview. So I think there'd be a lot of people like yourself that perhaps wouldn't have put it. I'm not sure it's on your bucket list yet, though, is it, Tim?
I was going to say that, yeah, there's a lot of other hikes that I think that I want to do first, but certainly if I get the time, it would be one. You know, Sarah was saying there's over 600 varieties of moss in Iceland, and I love moss and lichen. I can quite easily spend days, hours or days taking photos of moss and lichen.
I think that was part of one of the very first jobs that I had. Anyway, that's an interesting one. But going back to you and your bucket list, I'm not sure that you're going to be able to live until 150, Tim.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, if I plan on not dying, I think I'll be able to get there.
Not dying ever. Okay.
Yeah, it is becoming hard. It's sort of, there are so many things so many trips I want to do, and so many good walks and hikes come across. It just becomes really difficult. Now, this trip itself, it's surprisingly enough, it's probably one of the easier destinations to get to. It's a long flight from Sydney or Melbourne, wherever you happen to be leaving, through to Heathrow Airport in London. That is definitely a long flight. And then you've got a relatively short flight. I think she said it was about 3 hours from Heathrow through to Reykjavik in Iceland.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that sounded like the easy part. Now, having said that, I do not sleep very well on flights, and the London to Sydney flight is a long flight. I think it's probably one of the longest flights you can do.
Yeah, it's pretty long. Yeah, last time I did that was 2024. Yeah, I'm not in a hurry to do it again.
Now, this trip, the Hidden Trails trip, is run during the summertime. They run a batch of trips each year, and the tour guides and the company that manages the process in Finland is Amarok Tours. As I said, the link to their website's on the show notes. And I think the price itself, when you convert it into Australian dollars, works out roughly around about $8,000 per person. So, and I think Sarah was saying her airfares on top of that per person were probably another $3,000. So that takes you to about $11,000. And she did say Iceland is expensive, and she said 2 coffees cost them about 35 Australian dollars.
Yes, I know. Never will complain about the cost of a coffee.
But she did say they did a guided tour after their trip. So yeah, once you're there and you've spent the time and the energy and the money getting there, you may as well make the most of it.
Do a bit of extra touristing.
Yeah. And she said she may not end up getting back there. So that, again, that's another reason. Do what you can, see as much as the island as you can. So if you never get back there again, you can say you've done the main parts of Iceland itself. It's quite funny. You look at Iceland, which is outside of winter fairly green and lush.
Otherwise it's white.
Yeah, and Greenland, which is fairly icy. So, and I believe there was some reasoning for that, was to keep people away from wanting to go there, thinking of it's full of ice. I'm not going to end up going there. But who knows whether that's a true story or just something that was put out there.
I was going to say an urban myth, but it's probably I don't know what the opposite of an urban myth is in terms of the place.
So all up, this trip was 12 days long, and they were hiking for about 10 of that. It's interesting. She was saying that the trailhead starts off where the Ludvika Trail starts off, and then for the first couple of days you're running concurrently, you're running parallel pretty much on the same track. And from there, the Iceland Hidden Trails branches off. And she said there were a number of days they just had the cabins to themselves. And normally there are groups of 12. She said because there were some late cancellations, there were only 9 of them on this trip. So, if you want to see Iceland without the crowds, the Iceland Hidden Trails trip is definitely something that's worthwhile considering. It didn't surprise me. Well, a number of things didn't surprise me about Iceland. Not a lot of animals, although she did say that sheep were about it, and that for some reason they seem to be in groups of 3s. The farmers would let them go. They'd go wandering up in the hills. And they'd
gather into 3s.
Yeah, and then they'd get collected and brought back down over wintertime again. So it's that's not unusual for a lot of European countries where you're not getting a lot of wildlife. You're not getting deer, or you're not getting the blue sheep as you get into a lot of the mountain places through Himalayas. Not a lot of birds either, although there were some birds there. But she said this trip was really about the landscape. Fairly, it's a volcanic sort of landscape, very brutal looking sort of landscape. But if you look at there's a number of photos on the show notes for podcast 336 that are worthwhile going through and having a look at. And they're really amazing sort of landscapes. So it's the sort of thing where you're not, you've got a bit of both. It's a bit of a contradiction. You've got all the mosses and things like that where you can look in close and spend a lot of time looking at the small stuff. And then you've got this big, brutal sort of landscape, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's, I went through and had a look at the Amarok Tours website, and there's obviously one mountain that everyone seems to take a photo of. And I say mountain, the highest mountain there is 1,800 metres, but it's this green, lush sort of mountain. And I'm guessing that's because of the moss that it's going through and doing that. It's such vibrant colours. The other thing that surprised me as well was the temperatures. Now, this was a summertime trip, not a wintertime trip. So nighttime temperatures around about 2 degrees Celsius, daytime sort of 10 to 12 degrees, which is not unreasonable. I mean, you're not going to be wandering around in shorts and a T-shirt, but certainly I would have potentially expected a lot colder sort of conditions than that. But even at nighttime, 2 degrees is not unrealistic. But again, it's the sort of thing, Sarah was saying that she had a fairly heavy grade sleeping bag, which was probably a bit warm for what the trip was, but you can always unzip it and use it to throw it over the top of you, rather than having a sleeping bag that's not going to do the job you need.
Not warm enough.
Not warm enough, yeah. Mm. So I suppose just to finish off on this, we always ask the question, who is this walk suitable for? And she made a couple of points which were, as you would expect, you need to have a level of fitness. You don't want to be going over there and never having done more than 2 kilometres in a day, and it is classed as challenging. Mm-hmm. And part of the trip, they spend the first couple of days doing shorter walks, and it gives the guides a chance to see how everyone gets together as a group and what their abilities are like. But they also said the experience as well. So Sarah was saying she's not a fan of heights, and they do have some warning there about some high sections of trail. So again, we just recently we did the Ladakh Sky Trail with Jonty in northern India, and again he had the same comment that there were some trails there that it was almost like if you tripped and weren't paying attention,
you'd be off.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Sarah made exactly the same comment. So she said she's not a fan of it, but she managed to cope with it okay. But with a lot of these sort of trails in the more remote areas, you do have these narrow trails that you are going to have to sort of deal with that have drop-offs.
But no safety rails.
And no safety rails.
That's right. You can't rely on the safety rail.
And as she said, the average age of this trip was sort of in the 50s and 60s. And that's... I've seen a lot of very fit 50 and 60-year-old hikers around. So it's the sort of thing that as long as you have spent the time doing some fitness training before you go, I think if you're a fit and experienced hiker, whatever the age, I think this will be certainly a suitable trail. Okay, that's all for this podcast episode on the Iceland Hidden Trails episode. That's all for me. Bye for now.
And bye from me.